Welcome everybody to 52 Living Ideas. We are beginning our exploration of Autobiography of Louis Sullivan. Okay, and I'm a little bit scared because Louis Sullivan is my favorite thinker, and this is by far his most important book. Now, we went through kindergarten chats. This is at least about 10 times as deeper, if you can get it. And it's almost impossible for most people to get it. To understand it, my standard is that you have to be able to produce at least as much as Louis Sullivan. Then you understand it. And I don't think any of us actually understand it. So we have some things, and I'm going to start off. This time, I'm going to talk about my take. We're first talking about the first two chapters. I'm going to be talking about my take, then Sherri will be talking, then Joia, then Rob, then Rupali, and then we will open it up for questions, okay? All right. Here is, firstly, I want to tell you that this is very rare. It's rare to have a great thinker like Louis Sullivan in first place. Secondly, it is extremely rare for that person to actually tell you his story. And this is the autobiography of an idea. He's basically telling you how he made himself. So this is really special. I've really not seen anything like this before, okay? And so that's the subject. So what I'm going to do is that I went through these first two chapters, and I've identified one theme. It's just two sentences, okay? If you get these two sentences, if you actually understand these two sentences, you will get at least halfway there, okay? So this is the central theme of his life, okay? So I'm going to talk about these two sentences. I'm going to repeat them 4 different times. And in the middle, I'm going to talk about his view of nature, then his view of work and the world, and his description of his own character. So these are the 3 sections in the middle, all punctuated by the central theme. So what is the central theme? He says, life was beginning to break in upon him from outside. Okay, life was beginning to break in upon him from outside. A continuous breaking in from the outside and breaking out from the inside was to shape his destiny. Okay, so let me repeat. Life was beginning to break in upon him from outside. A continuous breaking in from the outside and breaking out from the inside was to shape his destiny. Okay, that is really the heart of his philosophy. This actually describes him better than anything else. So first, it starts with life. Okay, he always starts with life, his openness to life and taking in life. He's just taking in life. So life was beginning to break in upon him from outside. So life is the force that is driving things. And note that it is breaking in. It's not that he's kind of passively watching it as a TV. It is a cataclysmic event of him taking in whatever it is that life is telling him. Okay, and it is breaking in. Okay, so it's a very powerful force. So that's one part. A continuous breaking in. So it's not like one time you observe something and then you do something. Okay, it's continuous breaking in from the outside and breaking out from the inside. Okay, so it's not just one way. It's 2 ways. So it is breaking in from outside, life, okay, not objects, life, living things with their own force, their own nature. They are coming in. And it is breaking out from the inside. He has life. He's that little seedling, and it is breaking out from the inside. And both these things are happening together. And that is the primary movement that is going on. If you understand that is what is happening in his life, then you have some idea of what he's doing. Okay, so that is the theme, and that is the seedling that we are going to keep coming back to. So this is the first time I'm saying it. Now I want to take some examples from nature in the first example. In the second examples, I want to show you how he deals with human things, work, and human aspects. And thirdly, his description of his own character to illustrate this point. The first point I call all mine. He took all things for granted. It seemed natural to him that there should be flowers, grass, trees, cows, oxen, sunshine, and rain, the great open sky, the solid earth underfoot, men, women, children, the great ocean and its rock-bound shore. All these he took at their face value. They all belong to him. Okay, they all belong to him. Now that is the perspective. It's not like, oh, there is this life outside, how nice. No. This is all his. This is one idea. Second, look at his engagement of nature. He was not satisfied to glance. He must look long, very long and steadily. He must see things move. He must follow their story. He must himself live the drama of dark things slowly changing into white things. He's describing the snow coming down. It was all so real to him as he gazed through the window pane, alone and very quiet. So there are two parts, okay? Look at the intense focus on nature, on understanding life, taking in life. And he must himself live the drama of this. So there is a response to it. It's not just taking in, there is a response to it. And the culmination here, sorry, Maritza, but the culmination here is his reaction to a tree. Just behind the stone wall, to the right of the road, marvel of marvels, stood a gigantic solitary ash tree. On account of a certain chipmunk, various flowers, pebbles, and other things, the child had not noticed it during the approach. But all of a sudden, there it stood, grand, overwhelming, with its immense trunk, its broad branches nearly sweeping the grass, its towering dome of dense, dark green. Opposite it, across the road, was a farmhouse. Back of it, an open pasture. The child stood transfixed, appalled. A strange, faraway storm, as of distant thundering, was arising within his wonder self. Okay, a strange, faraway storm, as of a distant thundering, was arising within his wonder self. He had seen many trees, yes, but this tree, he trembled strangely. He wished to cry. After successfully passing the magnet tree, while saluting it affectionately in a calmer mood, this is what happens when he keeps crossing the tree day after day. Day after day, he passed the tree. It became his tree, his great friend. This is his reaction to life. This is his reaction to life. Okay? That is very different than just experiencing it passively. So let's come back to the central theme. Life was beginning to break in upon him from outside. You can see how the tree broke in. You can see how the snow falling was breaking in. A continuous breaking in from the outside. He's open to these things all the time and is alive to that, throughout his life. A continuous breaking in from the outside and breaking out from the inside was to shape his destiny. You can also see here the breaking out from inside, how much is going on from within him. And the glory of that is going to keep accentuating and building on itself using various tools throughout his life. But this basic pattern of remaining open to life and speaking to life, saying something proactively to life, transforming it, continues. Let's look at the next section. This is about work. And then when morning came, the hasty rattle and scoop and sip of showels, cleaning the sidewalks, heaping the snow in mountains in the street. Again, the song of work, the song of action. It was when first he saw the street cleaners at work that there upsprung a life fascination. The sight, the drama of things being done. He had missed nothing. He had noted every detail. He had seen it whole and seen it steady. He felt a budding sense of orderly power. Indeed, the rhythm of it all. And then, to the wondering child, there began the dawn of a wonder world. So see, he's looking at human action the same way he looks at nature. He has the same sense of wonder for human action. So he's letting the greatness about human things. He's watching street cleaners as a child out of his window. That's all it is, but that's what it is. And he sees the grandeur in that. He sees what is going on. He describes it as the song of work, the song of action. He's talking about the orderliness, the systematicness, the power of human beings achieving things. And he's seeing that and he's reacting the same way that he reacts to nature. As he goes on, he discovers there is a series of discovery he has of many words. Folks, I'm going to say all the good things. You can feel free to repeat it. You need to repeat it. I have had to repeat it many, 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 many times, and I still don't get it, okay? So please feel free to reread, repeat anything, okay? Because that's how everything gets built, It is the same principle of, breaking in and breaking out in cycles, and each time it becomes richer, and you add your own voice to the music of this. In many ways, we are like that child who is going forth every day. And I see us going through the autobiography just like that. There is a spectacle that we are seeing unfolding in front of us, and we have to react to it the same way, hopefully in at least some similar way to what this child is doing. So feel free to repeat. No need to complain.
I should mention here, nobody else knows what I just did. Shrikant, you should.
Yes. It was a comment. You know, Sherri was saying, "Damn it, you stole everything I was going to say." Yeah. Don't worry about it. I should have warned everybody beforehand. But I deliberately did not do that because I knew that I would get this complaint at some point from somebody or the other. All right, because normally I don't say anything, so I don't have a chance to do this. Okay, so I'm going to talk about 5 things here. Okay, 5 different discoveries of the world. See that it is not uniform. He is noticing different things about the world, about life, about human life, and he's reacting to all of that, just like he's reacting to the tree. One of my favorite stories is the story of the moon, where he looks up as a child, I think he's 2.5, something like that, and says, look, says to his mom who is carrying him that, look, the moon is running through the clouds. And mom says, no, it's the clouds that are going by the moon. And he's very offended. He says, I see the moon is running. And then by chance, his eye fixes on the moon and he sees the clouds go by. And his reaction is, he had made a discovery. He was delighted that he had made a discovery. He felt a sense of mastery and pride. He had discovered these things, and he tells that to his mom. The importance here is that he is seeing things from his own eyes. He's making his own independent judgments. Okay, that is huge. So there is that independence. There is a core in him from which he's acting. The second example, this is when he's listening to music that his mom is playing. It says, floodgates open wide, a wonder, a joy, a happiness, an exaltation supreme over all the world. The child did not understand. Had a new world begun to rise, this time a wonder world within himself. Now he's looking at his own reaction to this amazingly beautiful piece of music. He is deeply moved, he's sobbing, and he's talking about that with the same sense of wonder. Look what is going on within me. And he has the same sense of feeling of grandeur of what is going on within him that he has for nature or work of human beings. Then he talks about a small incident where he drops a pail into a well. And he talks about there arose within and without the child a new world, a world of accountability. The reason I bring that up is that it's not just uniform of saying, okay, nature or human beings or inside. He is lovingly focused on every major movement of this process. And he's reacting to capturing each and every one of them. Then there is the amazing incident of him, his father, and the sea. And he's afraid that the sea is going to swallow him up as he's, the waves are coming between him and his dad. So he can't see him while the dad is in a boat. And he talks about, thus arose in prophecy the rim of another world, the world of strife and power, So you see, it's different aspects that he's getting. And then I'm not going to talk about the schoolroom, but there is only one thing I want to bring up. And he talks about, he notices what the kids in upper grades are doing. And he looks at it as a world of drama of the upper class students. And he tries to figure out what is going on. So even the things that he doesn't particularly like, he's saying, what is going on? I want to understand the drama of it. And he gets engrossed in it, and he actually understands. He is not interested in figuring out the lessons that he has been assigned, but what are these kids doing and how does that actually work? That, he says, so summary of all of this is that you can see that he's reacting to every aspect of human life, just like he's reacting to nature. This back and forth going on with nature, this back and forth is going on with human action and human emotion, you know, all of human experience. So let's repeat. Life was beginning to break in upon him from outside. It was not just nature. It was all of human work, all of human experience, every aspect of it, whether it was the grandeur of music, the drama of odd social situations, all of it was breaking in upon him. A continuous breaking in from the outside. He's alive to every aspect of it and breaking out from inside. So as a child, he's not just saying, the music touches him deeply and he has a response to it. He has a response to everything. He has a response to even the schoolroom. He's saying, that is a drama. I want to master the drama. I want to live the drama. I want to see what it is myself. So there is a movement taking place from his core outside. Finally, I want to describe his character. He says, at the age of 2, he had developed temper, strong will, and obstinacy. Okay, so he's not like a nice little quiet boy, okay? He is a very independent, obstinate, you know, tremendously driven person. He was rather an independent, isolated compound of fury, curiosity, and tenderness. I like this very much. An independent, isolated compound of fury, curiosity, and tenderness. He was of a pronounced, independent nature. This is a core thing about him. So he has an eye. He has the point which takes in stuff from the world on his own and initiates things from his core. He talks about his mode of operation. He seemed to be nothing but a pair of eyes and ears, not intended for books, but for the world, little and big, about him. And thus, he went on, unaffected by the abstract, concerned only with the concrete, the actual, the human. He is not buying ideas of other people. This process of back and forth is between him and life. He takes in life itself and he speaks out his own soul to the world. Whatever he says comes through that, not borrowed ideas of other people. Again, let me summarize. Let me end by repeating the same quote. Life was beginning to break in upon him from outside. So you can see that in his own character. He's very open, he's very tender. He's this wide-eyed, he's full of eyes, he's full of ears for the world. A continuous breaking in from outside and breaking out from the inside. The breaking out from inside is something spectacular. So far, we have talked mostly about breaking in from outside. And we are going to see that second aspect developed dramatically over time. Thank you. Next up, Thanks. Next up is going to be Sherri.
All right, so thank you, Shrikant. That was fantastic. You took every single, I don't know if you can see that, every one of my points, right down the page. So, but you did it so beautifully, I'm not going to be angry. There's a couple things I want to talk about. I want to first go into an idea of memory and how that is an impact throughout the rest of this book as we'll read. And then I want to go back to what Shrikant's already presented here, because it's almost verbatim of what I was going to say, but there's a few things I want to dig a little bit deeper on. And then I think later Rob's going to talk about music and a few other things. But the one thing that stands out to me about this book, and we talked about this last week too, is the memory it takes to remember these kinds of incidents from such a young childhood. Obviously, later on in the book, he's young adult or a child or full-fledged adult by that point in time. So memories are different. But and this is a question I pose to you now to answer at the end of what is your earliest memory. And I bring this up because we've had the situation with our family of having, big family gatherings around, and somehow, I don't know, maybe there's new babies in the house or something. And somehow the discussion is, what's the earliest thing that you remember? And we had this kind of experience of all of us, my brothers and I, Rob was with us, talking about our earliest memory. And I didn't remember how old I was at my earliest memory. All I remembered was the parts I'll tell you in a second. And then what happened is my parents were able to fill in time frame and details, and you'll hear that in a second. But I'm going to ask that each of you do this too, because I find that our earliest memories are often really telling to who we become and the things that drive us and interest us. So when I was asked this question, I told my parents and everyone else, all the family that was in the room, that my earliest memory, and I didn't remember the house we were at, I told my parents that my earliest memory was a patio that maybe was light in color, maybe concrete, and that I was on my trike or big wheel or whatever it was, and I had turned the steering wheels all the way to the left and kept pedaling slowly in a circle, around and around and around. But while I was doing it, I was leaned over to the side and staring off to the right. And all around I would go. And I remember doing this for a very, very long time. And I remember doing it because the concrete was sparkling. The sun was hitting it at such an angle, and the aggregate in the concrete was sparkling. And so I sat there. As I'm telling this story, my mother puts down her coffee cup and looks at my dad and kind of goes white in the face. And then they start smiling. And so I finished the story of, here I am going round and round in circles, watching the light sparkle off of the aggregate and the concrete. And my mom, when I'm finished, turns to my dad and said, "Oh my God, we thought we had to take you in. We thought you had completely lost your marbles. You did that for hours, over and over and over again." So we then got into the conversation because, of course, Rob was there. You need to scoot in here, Rob. And then the conversation came to, well, okay, apparently I was like 2.5, 3 years old. And just the effect of the material was so impactful to me. I remembered it, even if I couldn't remember all the other parts. So then the question came, okay, so Rob, what was your earliest memory?
Correcting the grammar of my playmates when I was about 3.5 years old.
So, so put it in the back of your mind for each of you to think about what was your first earliest memory. It often is quite telling about the things that drive you in your life, just like the things that drove Louis Sullivan. So that's a fun little diversion. But let me go back to the same thing that Shrikant's talking about. And I want to add a little more depth and a couple of details.
Sherri, feel free to repeat whatever, because, it's like the more
Yeah.
times people hear it, more times, they will get it. It's impossible to get it in one sitting.
Yes.
Anyway. Yeah.
Yes. So one of the that particular line that Shrikant mentions, the life coming in from outside coming in, that is so important to understanding. Shrikant's totally right. Understanding that line is so important to understanding Sullivan. But there's also something else that really brackets these first two chapters that I want to point out. And at the bottom of page 9, he's talking here about he was merely another of the brat nuisances running about and laughing and screaming and fighting and brawling like all the others, all bent on joy and destruction. The particular kink in this little man's brain, however, was this: he had no desire to destroy, except always his momentary mortal enemies. His bent was the other way. And so what happens and I'm going to jump to the end of chapter 2, and then we'll fill in a little bit in between. Let's see, I went too far, 2 pages. Okay. So in these first 2 chapters, we're getting the child first, so very, very young, and then we're getting him as a slightly, well, maybe a toddler, stepping out and exploring the world and starting to discover the world. And at the end of the chapter 2, we have this line. The youngster of 6 had 2 eyes that saw everything without desire to plunder. And I think that part, we're seeing the early parts of the creative in Louis Sullivan, where his mind, it's very, very important to him of who he is, that his mind is about creation and about building and not about destruction. So we're going to point out a few different parts of this. I was going to go next to just because it's so worth it. The line, it's on top of page 17 that Shrikant started with, this continuous breaking in from the outside and breaking out from the inside. And I find it interesting that he uses the word breaking, because it to me wouldn't seem like a Sullivan word, because not bent on destruction, but like Shrikant said, these things, the world coming to him and his reaction to the world really is that kind of cataclysm. It's like when a fine little root goes down into a crack between a boulder, and the boulder pushes in on the root, and the roots push out on the boulder, and eventually a massive cleave, and the boulder is broken into 2. That's the kind of drama that Sullivan is talking about. So a couple of the things that also come up is this love of seeing the construction of things. And he calls it the pageantry of labor, the street cleaners. And it's a loving description. You can only make this kind of memory if you remembered every one of those details, the way that the light sparkled off of the quartz rock in the concrete, You can only do that if you were so deeply drawn to it. And he goes on about the thrill. And he actually says here, the thrill began and the child breathed hard. The child isn't actually doing any of the street sweeping. It's just the thrill of seeing the street sweeping happening. And he writes, then followed the second rank, 4 men with huge brooms made of switches. They also, two-fisted, swung 1, 2, 1, 2, shaping a windrow in the gutter. Then came the glory of it all, the romantic and utterly thrilling and befitting climax, an enormous, wonderful, speckled gray Normandy horse, drawing a heavy tip cart, and followed as a retinue of 2 men, one sweeping the windrows into the hillocks, and the other with shovel and with a mighty faith, moving these mountains into the great chariot. Thus appeared from Washington Street, and thus passed in orderly action, disappeared onto Harrison Avenue, the pageant of labor. I just think these are amazing descriptions. Then he gets into seeing, let's see, what page is this one here? The dark. Oh, that's the moon story. Okay. And then Rob's going to talk a little bit about music again later, and I don't want to steal that thunder. It's something Rob and I have been talking about a fair bit over the years. We don't need to talk about the well, the accountability of dropping the bucket. Swallowed up in the sea. Hang on one second. Okay, so then we get on to the beginning of chapter 2, when he's talking about the curve of the little one's experience in contact with the outer world and his individual impulsive responses here too. And this is when they leave there, they're coming back into South Reading, and he starts talking about all these different people that he meets. He meets Whitmore, the neighbor, who has invented and perfected a manufacture of a new type of crutch that has remained standard to this day. He talks lovingly about the workshop up on the hill and the road, how it curves there, and the heavy pines on the right on the way up, and the scattering of the woods. These are hugely important parts of his memory. We talk about the elms again. I'm so glad you did that. And then we get to this line again. Shrikant mentioned this one too. The child, this is his own beginning ideas of who he is. The child, he says, was not an, and I don't pronounce French properly.
Oh.
Enfant terrible.
Enfant terrible.
Not too bad. Okay. He was rather an independent, isolated compound of fury, curiosity, and tenderness. Subtle indeed were the currents flowing and mingling within him, embryotic passions arising and shaping, ambitions vaguely stirring, while his sharp eyes saw everything. And it's these eyes that see everything that we come back to over and over again. We see them several times up to this point. We're going to see them through the rest of chapter 2, and then through the rest of the book. And it's really something that we know of Sullivan from everything else that we've read from Kindergarten Chats. And it's fascinating to me that at a really super young age, like in school, he talks about this too, where he sees things that nobody around him is seeing. And these are parts of that reaction of understanding that others don't see it and that he does, is part of how his own character, how his own self is being developed. And And then we get to another one of these little construction. I mean, we've read a few of them already. The snow, did I miss the snow? Not yet. So then there's also this one about building walls. This one's great to me. Because, now in the last, 4 years, the whole idea of building walls has a completely different context. So let's put it back into the right kind of context. And this starts at the bottom of 31 and continues on 32. And he writes here, what was it about the 4 men? He's talking about a lesson in school where he's being told that 4 men are building a wall. What was it about the 4 men who built so many perches of stone wall in 3 days? And 2 other men were to build some wall in 6 days. What did it amount to anyway? The real question was, where was that wall to be built? For whom was it to be built? What was his name? What were the names of the men who were building the wall? For it was becoming a real wall. Were they Irish or Scotch? Where did they get the stone to build the wall? Where did it come from? The rough quarry across the road from the schoolhouse? Did they gather up boulders from the fields? Because those are really different walls. Why was this matter of 4 men and 2 men irrelevant? Why not this matter of 4 men and 2 men irrelevant? The information was far too sparse, too unconvincing. He could not place the wall, and what good was any wall that he couldn't see? And thus he went on, unaffected by the abstract, concerned only with the concrete, the actual, and the human. So here's a lesson that's being taught in his class about some historical tidbit.
It's mathematics.
It's about mathematics.
It's a math story problem.
It's a math. It's a word.
So much wall.
It's a word problem in math, and he has in his mind totally designed walls. And they're one is this kind of a stone and it's that kind of a wall. And the construction details would be like this. And the other is it's a round rubble wall from the field stone. And they would all be put together like this. And maybe it would go in that shape. This is where he's going. And they're asking him, can you multiply 6 and 2 and 4 and 8, So once again, he's going in such a different direction than the very simple little tidbit that's unconnected to everything else. But the best that I love here is here he's talking about his grandfather as a teacher. And when he gets this letter home that, he's not a very good teacher. And his grandfather has this outburst of laughter over this whole thing. Claiming here, ending in a long, drawn, spasmodic chuckle, impressive of his cynical sense of humor, his infinite contempt for those who had no eyes, for those who had eyes and yet saw not. To call his sharp-eyed grandson a dullard, why, he said, one might as well call Sirius a flapjack, and other joking words to that effect. For he was fond of teasing his grandson, whom he had so long watched out of the corner of his eye. So it is something that he's getting that sense also reflected back from his grandfather. His grandfather sees what his son sees. His grandfather understands why the teachers, why Louis finds his teachers really boring. And we get on into a lot of discussion about school, which I think is going to be Rupali's. And frankly, I find this part very difficult to read, because I had the same experience in school of just becoming bored. It's people don't understand how important becoming bored in school, how devastating it can be, and what a waste of time it really is for children. And I love that Shrikant's talking about snow. I don't know that they had a lot of snow where you grew up. But this whole description of the snow, where do I have it here? Hang on, did I miss something here? Oh, 35. No, I missed the snow part. That's all right. Yeah, Shrikant talked about it about seeing the snow change. He had to experience it himself, of seeing the snow falling, changing black objects to white objects, and then watching everybody do, again, it's that pageantry of the labor of seeing the material change form and then seeing people transform the material. This will be very familiar to those of you who read Kindergarten Chats with us, because he talks an awful lot about the creative impulse that takes the stone just lying on the ground isn't anything until that impulse takes the material and changes it. So that is, I think, going to be some of the great fun things to look at as we go through, thinking of things of the young architect and how he's seeing the world. Watch his descriptions of physical things in the world that will eventually become building materials to him, because he's fascinated with them at this toddler age already. So we're going to watch that grow. The other thing that I want to point out is a little bit more on the psychological. We'll see this develop as we go on. But remember, from these first two chapters, we have one sense of what he thinks of his grandparents. He dearly loves his grandparents, and they him, of course. And we have the sense of his mother seeing him as just this perfect angel who could never possibly do any wrong. And there's just this dear sense of love about his mother. And then there's this very distant coldness to his father. And notice we see that from like the very beginning of the first chapter, this very distant coldness, where he refers to his father as, well, he married his mother because she would have been a benefit to his business, doesn't think he ever loved her, doesn't think he loved anybody, didn't even think he loved himself. But notice also that their common bond from the very early days in this book is of that love of nature. And that love of nature is so important in who Louis Sullivan is, that there's got to be a link of good in that relationship with his father. Obviously, part of that love of nature comes from his grandparents too. But we'll watch that also develop as we go on, but I'm not going to make any spoilers.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Sherri. Next up is Joia, Rob, and Rupali. Joia.
It is wonderful to come after Shrikant and Sherri, because similar to Sherri, as Shrikant was going through all of his points, I had a lot of all of the same points mentioned that I want to talk about too. But I think this is the idea, as Shrikant was pointing out, to keep going over these again and again and pull out different things. But I had absolutely marked the line that Shrikant started with the line to start. And the connection I made here is with one of Sullivan's most famous lines, which is, remember the seed. And this whole description of the breaking in from the outside and breaking out from the inside, to me, that is the description of the seed. That is what the seed does. When you plant the seed, right, it's just this inert thing. But when you plant it, right, there's whatever is coming in, the soil, the sun, the water, and then there's the breaking out. And the whole process of growth starting from that seed is the going out and the coming in. And I absolutely love that we get that sense of that right here, the breaking out and the breaking in. And then we're going to get the story that is the story that starts Louis Sullivan off. And I want to talk about this story. This one, it's so personally meaningful to me. And Sherri asked us to think about what were some of our first memories and how do they relate to the people that we have become. So I love that Sherri's first memory is all about concrete and Rob's first memory is all about grammar. So it probably isn't going to shock anyone here to know that some of my first memories are all about stories being read to as a child. I have very distinct memories of watching the Winnie the Pooh cartoons and getting so involved with the intensity of the drama. I almost can't watch them as an adult because they go by so quickly, and it's just completely foreign to how I remember the experience of going through this epic journey with Winnie the Pooh in what is really just such a very short cartoon. So for me, it's absolutely the stories, and music too is also my other one. I have lots of memories of singing and music that are among my first memories. But I want to start here by pointing out the drama that is in the story, just the way that Louis Sullivan writes about the experience of the street cleaners. And as Shrikant pointed out, all it is this everyday occurrence that any of the adults in the room would have never paid any attention to, because all it is just the routine work of the street cleaners. But for Louis Sullivan, so observant, watching the world through the window, it is this intense drama, and how he gets us into that experience in the way that he writes this. So I just wanted to read this. So he says, he loved to look out of the window to see people moving to and fro. But it was when he first saw the street cleaners at work that there upsprung a life fascination, the sight, the drama of things being done. South Bennett Street ran from Washington Street to Harrison Avenue, a short block, but for him, a large world. The street was paved with cobblestones. The sidewalks were of brick. He was there at the window when the work began. Came on the front rank 4 men armed with huge watering cans painted red. These they swung in rhythm. 1, 2, 1, 2. The thrill began. The child breathed hard. Then followed the second rank. 4 men with huge brooms made of switches. They also, 2-fisted, swung 1, 2, 1, 2, shaping a window into the gutter. Then came the glory of it all, the romantic, the utterly thrilling and befitting climax, an enormous, wonderful, speckled gray Normandy horse drawing a heavy tip cart, and followed as a retinue by 2 men, one sweeping the windrows into hillocks, the others with shovel and with mighty faith, moving these mountains into the great chariot. Thus appeared from Washington Street, thus passed in orderly action, thus disappeared into Harrison Avenue, the pageant of labor, leaving the child alone, thrilled, with a sort of alarm of discovery, held by utter infatuation. He had missed nothing. He had noted every detail. He had seen it whole and seen it steady. It is a close surmise that what actually passed in the child's mind, aside from the romance, was a budding sense of orderly power. Indeed, the rhythm of it all. And then, to the wondering child, there began the dawn of a wonder world. And he's going to tell us next that as a child, his mother told him the stories of knights and dragons, the fairy tale stories that even still now we often think about when we think of fairy tales, and how he himself got all wrapped up in these fairy tale stories. But for him, it was this story of the street cleaners that was just as epic and exciting as the story of the knights and the dragons. And then again, the story of his discovery, which Shrikant took us through. And again, I just wanted to read some of this, like how he describes, again, the drama, the excitement of what it was to make the discovery. And he says, as by accident, his eye fastened on the moon. The moon held steady, and he was amazed to see the clouds go by. Then consciously, he tried it on the clouds, and the moon again plowed on. This process, he reversed and reversed until he felt sure. And then it was he confided to his weary mother, sagging under the intolerable burden of him, that he had made a discovery. He felt a sense of mastery and pride. He had discovered this thing. In a world rising larger, difficulties appeared, and this particular thing was not quite what it seemed at first to be, but he had mastered it. And then again, Similarly, he's watching out the window again, the story again of the snow, again of getting involved in the drama of everything that is going on. He was not satisfied to glance. He must look very long and steadily. He must see things move. He must follow the story. He must himself live the drama of dark things slowly changing into white things. It was all so real to him as he gazed through the window pane, alone and very quiet. And then when morning came, the hasty rattle and scoop and sip of the shovels, cleaning the sidewalks, heaping the snow in mountains in the street, again, the song of work, the song of action. And I think, again, it is just so important to see how it is that he is taking in all of these things, the way that they are breaking in on him and the way that he is also breaking outwards in his response to everything. And his descriptions of these discoveries, of it being a new world, that there's constantly these new worlds that break in. And I love his description of it being a wonder self, that he has this wonder self that is constantly in this interaction with the worlds breaking in and breaking out. And then I do want to come back and talk to, again, this line that I think is beautiful about all these things he took at their face value. They all belonged to him. And that, I think, is such an important attitude, this idea of it all belongs to him. And what does that mean? Because it obviously doesn't mean that it belongs to him in the sense of him being some sort of, I don't know, prince or tyrant, or it's his property. But just to have this attitude of life, that he belongs with everything in the world and all of this is his. I have a comment that it's what mastery and curiosity together feels like, that he's bringing his wonder self to everything. He's trying to master everything. And he has this ambition. He wants to be able to take it all in, this curiosity that's going to expand out to everything, nature, other people, himself, to take it all in and then to master it in return. And just kind of his experiences of what that was like. And then again, we get the story of the father fishing. And again, we get another new world that is breaking. There arose in prophecy the rim of another world, a world of strife and power on the horizon verge of a greater sea. And then we get to, how he's going to school, and school is just boring. I think it just makes a great, we see how he's such the student of nature and the student of life, so that when he finally goes to school, it's such an anticlimax that it's just worth just passing by, that the school itself was so unimportant to his experience as a learner. And I'm sure, again, Rupali is going to have so much to say about the education there. And then I did want to talk again about the beautiful description of the tree, which I wish Maritza were here, because I know she would love talking about the description of when he discovered the tree. And again, this description of his wonder self. It's a word that's not really an English word that I really think we all here ought to make this a common word in English, because every child ought to have a wonder self. And wonder self just ought to be a word that everybody in English is speaking and valuing and trying to share with the children that we raise. And even how we are as adults, we should never give up our wonder self. We should always keep that spirit of the wonder self. So his description of, he says here, the child stood transfixed, appalled. A strange faraway storm, as of distant thundering, was arising within his wonder self. He had seen many trees, yes, but this tree, he trembled strangely. He wished to cry. With gentle scolding, he was dragged away. From this point, the road was bare and shaggy. Halfway down to the left and set well back was found not the little red schoolhouse of romance, but a rather large white one, clapboard, green blinds gabled, a bell, a well with force pump, trampled playground, and so on. He was duly presented the teacher. Her face and form, alas, like many other face and form, have passed into memory's oblivion. All details settled. He was to come the next morning, which he did, after successfully passing the magnet tree, while saluting it affectionately in a calmer mood. Day after day, he passed the tree. It became his tree, his great friend. And again, just the contrast here of the wonder self and the experience he has with the tree versus with the school and the teacher, which is so important that it's not even worth remembering, but the experience with the tree, that it was his tree. Let's see. And then next, I also did want to talk about this passage that Sherri was pointing our attention to, where he's paying attention to the upper students, paying attention to the drama of what they are learning. And they're learning a math problem where the whole point is to figure out essentially the rates of what some people can do in 3 days versus 6 days. But he's not at all interested in the abstraction, that from this early age, he's so connected in with the concretes and with the values. I love the question that he asks here, which is, what did it amount to anyway? And just this phrase, amount to, the word amount, it's a numerical number. This is the mathematical lesson, but amount to is also the value lesson. What did it matter? What did it amount to? Like, why do we care? And we get to, what is the real question? The real question isn't the abstract numbers. He says, the real question was, where was the wall to be built? For whom was it to be built? What was his name? What were the names of the men who were building the wall? For it was becoming a real wall. Were they Irish or Scotch? Where did they get the stone to build the wall? Did they get it from the rough quarry across the road from the schoolhouse? Did they gather up boulders from the fields? Was not this matter of 4 men and 2 men irrelevant? The information was too sparse, too unconvincing. He could not place the wall. And what good was any wall he could not see? And thus he went on, unaffected by the abstract, concerned only with the concrete, the actual, the human. And knowing, as we know, that he is going to become this great architect who clearly masters the abstract mathematics that are necessary to be a great architect, but yet the seed is still here in the experience of the concrete experience of the human story, that he really wants to understand the people behind it, how it works, how it fits into everything else that's around it, that's what really matters. And anything that's the mathematics is just on top of it. And he repeats this question again when he's talking about, how he's, just tired of heading to class, but he gets caught up watching a twitching squirrel in a tree or a beautiful white cloud curiously changing shape as it slowly drifted through a beautiful blue sky. And what did it all amount to? And, and in contrast again of what it meant to just be at the top of the class. And I wanted to end again with the end of the line here, which says that he had 2 eyes that saw everything without desire to plunder. And as Sherri pointed out, I think it fits with the line at the beginning that his bent was the other way, that his bent was not to plunder, but to create. And here we see the seed of Louis Sullivan becoming a creator. And I just wanted to end by pointing out that I like to think of this book, as Shrikant pointed out, as a kind of mystery. This is the autobiography of an idea, and it's the mystery of what is the idea. So what are all of these stories that we see of the seed that is breaking in and breaking out? What is the big idea that this is the seed that it's going to flourish into? So that is the question that I leave you with as we go from this chapter through the rest of the book.
Thank you, Joia. Thanks. Next up is going to be Rob, followed by Rupali. Rob.
Hi there. So I've got a couple things to go on to cover here. First of all, I want to reassure Joia that if you want wonder self to become a common word, go check. I bet the Germans have a single word for it that you can just use.
Wunderkind.
Wunder ego or something. I bet they've already made a single word for that. We can borrow that. One thing to talk about this idea of, I hadn't planned to talk about this, but as everybody was talking, I started thinking about this idea of everything he sees is his. What is this sense of ownership? And it's a sense of not being personally detached from the world, but having this sense of a personal connection. The ownership isn't technical ownership in the legal sense or anything like, or the property rights sense or anything like that. He's obviously too young in these anecdotes. to be thinking of it in those terms, but it's a sense of, it's his tree because he has this sense of an intense personal connection to it. And one of the things that struck me about that is this idea of, the world breaking in and him breaking out, and that sense of involvement with the world. And it struck me. So I was reviewing a book a couple of weeks ago and came across the phrase, the real world out there. And this one that, you've heard a lot. Oh, what about, can we really ever have contact with the real world out there? And it struck me how much I hate that phrase, the real world out there. Because there's like a whole, just by stating the idea, there's a whole realm of like bad philosophy and even bad psychology and bad psychoepistemology contained in that sense of the world being something out there. That you are contained in here, this world out there, and it's disconnected from you, and you could not have this sense of ownership and personal connection with the real world that you regard as being out there, as opposed to something that you are part of and you are in the middle of. So the world in which you live is the much more accurate way of putting the phrase. That you are actively engaged and involved and connected to everything around you. And I think that's more the sense we're seeing here, as opposed to this sort of, the world out there kind of attitude that I think there's a whole psychoepistemology, a whole automatized way of dealing with the world that is contained in that phrase that can really lead people astray.
There's a lot of walls built up.
A lot of walls built up, yes, of that.
From the quarry from across the street.
But I was talking earlier with Sherri about this, how this is structured. And it's a series of childhood experiences he has, each one of which has some sort of larger lesson or intellectual breakthrough or value connotation that comes from it. So, for example, I'm not going to, I'm going over the same quotes that everybody's used, I think 3 times now. But the thing about the moon, where he says he made a discovery, he felt a sense of mastery and pride. And in a world rising larger, difficulties appeared. And this particular thing was not quite what it seemed first to be, but he had mastered it. So this is our pattern here, that he has some experience that he recalls very vividly. And then he draws some wider sort of philosophical observation from it. And what Sherri was observing is that this is not exactly how you would remember it at the time as a child. So clearly he has some memory of this event, although it's also clear from the way he describes some of these that it's his memory augmented with the retelling, of his parents mentioning, retelling these stories about his childhood later on, year after year, as happens in families. And then it's that childhood experience looked back at with the sort of from the perspective of the adult, from the adult perspective, identifying what was going on there and the wider significance of it in a way that the child could not have. So he's sort of giving these childhood experiences, but not really from the child's perspective, rather from the adult's perspective, looking back retrospectively on this remembered and possibly augmented and embellished version of the story that he's gotten from his parents. And it raises the question of, can you really, so Sherri was saying, you can't really make these philosophical observations as a 4-year-old. And I thought, well, yes and no. Yes, you can make philosophical observations and breakthroughs as a 4-year-old. You're making them on a 4-year-old level. And then it's only later as an adult, you can come back and say, oh, here's what I was really figuring out. I mean, there's all sorts of things like this. Like there's a great, I can't remember the name. There's a TV show that we saw when our kids were very young. We saw this TV show about the development of infants and all the different stages they go through, like just in the first 2 years of life, all the different stages and all the different things they learn about the world. So things like object permanence, the idea that if you see, if I show you this cup and then I put it behind something or off screen so you can't see it, it's still there, right? So that's the object permanence. The object didn't go disappear just because I pulled it off frame. It's still there. Well, that's something you learned when you were 12 to 18 months old. maybe a little younger. I can't remember the exact timeline, but it's something you learned when you were an infant. And but the thing is, at the time, you wouldn't identify, oh, I've learned object permanence now. You would identify that later on. You might have a memory of, oh, I remember having this experience at a puppet show or whatever, and realizing this thing was still there. You might have possibly, if you had a very strong memory, you might possibly have a memory of it later on. But it's only as an adult you can come back and take that memory and identify it as, I discovered object permanence. But at the time, you were discovering a very important, high-level abstract principle. You're just not discovering it in the abstract terms that you would use as an adult. But 4-year-olds are philosophers. They are drawing very broad and very wide conclusions about the nature of the world and their place in it.
And they're always asking why.
They're always asking why. That's another characteristic of a philosopher. But 4-year-olds are philosophers. They are drawing philosophical conclusions. They just don't know it in those terms. So this is him coming back as an adult and basically identifying what philosophical ideas was I ingesting or happening upon or forming at this very young age. Now, the last thing I wanted to talk about is the, by the way, the idea of 4-year-olds developing philosophy and developing these implicit conclusions that they can't yet identify in more abstract and explicit terms. That, of course, ties into a lot of the stuff we were discussing in previous meetups about the concept of sense of life. That art appeals to your sense of life, and the sense of life is basically the sum of all these philosophical conclusions you drew when you were 4 years old that you didn't have the abstract words for, but the conclusion is there in its sort of primitive form. And that is what forms your sense of life, your view of the world and your place in it, and what's important and what's interesting and what your values are. So that ties in with this concept of a sense of life. Now, the last thing is this anecdote about next page about
The music.
the music, and he talks about his mother.
Melancholy. Right here. Afternoon playing the piano.
Yeah. Okay. I was on the next page where he actually.
Okay.
So he talks about his mom playing Beethoven and Chopin, but then he talks about she's playing a nocturne. I was like, well, if it's a nocturne, it's got to be Chopin. Right? He doesn't specify, but I'm just going to assume it's Chopin because it's a nocturne. Nocturnes are among those famous works. He wrote about 21 nocturnes.
Besides, it says with fervor and melancholy sweetness. It's
fervor and melancholy sweetness.
That's
Chopin. Yeah, that basically describes just about every nocturne he wrote. And Lost in Dreamland. So that's very much the Chopin nocturne. So what is a nocturne? I want to just briefly talk about that, which is a nocturne was, I think it's a term that existed before Chopin. It was basically a piece of music made for playing at night. Right now, that's kind of a vague description. And what does that mean? But with Chopin, it took on a very specific form, which is usually a series of arpeggios, like da 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 da, going on in the left hand, supporting a long, flowing, lyrical, what they call cantabile melody. Cantabile means basically song-like, or as if it's being sung. So it's a long, flowing, lyrical sort of melody on the right hand. And they generally have a sense of being dreamlike or of having a sense of mystery. They're very deeply, and because it's meant to be played at nighttime, they had this deeply emotional and kind of introspective character. And that tied into, another conversation we had recently that ties into this is talking about, I was trying to figure out why is it I like Chopin so much? Because I'm learning how to play a couple nocturnes right now. And why is it like Chopin so much? Because he's so gloomy, right? And I'm not a gloomy, downbeat, I'm one of the pieces I'm playing. It's one of his preludes, the Raindrop Prelude. And the story on this, supposedly, because it's from George Sand, who he was living with at the time, in her memoir, said that he composed this after having a dream about drowning in a lake. So, this is a song this is a piece of music that's about how you would feel if you were drowning in a lake. Why do I like this? Because it's gloomy. It's there's a sense of despair and sadness throughout. Although I'm not a sad and gloomy person. So I'm trying to figure out why is it that I love Chopin so much despite that. Now,
maybe you really are.
well, he has a couple of happier pieces, although generally what I find is that Chopin is a guy who could be happy after he had a triple espresso. So the happy pieces are really super fast and I can't play them. I'm not, you have to be, you know, Chopin or Liszt or one of those guys to be able to actually do it. But thinking, why do I like these so much, even though they're so sad? And I realized that the average Chopin piece, and especially the nocturnes, which are very emotional and introspective, is that it's about a certain emotion that it's trying to convey. But beneath that, every one of his pieces is not just about this specific emotion. It's about what it's like to be able to feel this deeply and profoundly. And that's what really makes them so introspective and gives them the introspective character, is you're not just experiencing the emotion, you're experiencing the feeling of having the emotion, right? The experience of observing and appreciating and being able to discover the faculty of feeling itself. And that's, I think, is maybe very much why this would have spoken to him as a child. He would find himself moaning under the piano. That happens occasionally when I'm practicing. I find Sherri moaning under the piano during a Chopin nocturne.
No, wait a minute. So Louis Sullivan says here, why was he overcome and melted into lamentation?
Yes, melted into lamentation. Yeah, so I can see
awakening the power of that full depth of emotion.
But it's specifically not just awakening an emotion, but awakening that a sense of one's capacity for emotion.
Yeah.
That I think is perhaps why, and that's why he concludes, had there been awakened a new power within this child of 3, a power arising from the fountainhead of all tears. So it's this sense of there's a sense of an emotional power. He doesn't just discover an emotion. He discovers an emotional power. And I think that's why I think it's just got to be Chopin, because he is the guy who does this to you.
Wonderful.
That's it.
Yeah.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Robert. That was delightful. Thanks. Next up is Rupali.
Wow, that was amazing, Rob. You know, I was thinking about music at our school, and something that we noticed. There's one lullaby that our music director teaches our students, and it's in a foreign language. And it's so wonderful that while they are practicing, some of the kindergarten children will go off to sleep when they are singing. It is just funny to watch them because they just are in the lull of the music. So that was very well said. And you know, what is interesting about this book is about half of the book is about Louis Sullivan's childhood. And why does he spend so much time describing his childhood? So that has been something that, you know, I've been thinking about. And what is important about being a child in our society? You know, we've talked about the society is made for adults, but the children are just an equally important people in the society. And how do children think? They think very differently from adults. I think Louis Sullivan does a fantastic job of telling us how children think, because he narrates how he thought. To go back to Sherri's question about memories, my earliest memory is, you know, of my grandfather. So I must have been maybe 3 or 4 years old, and I remember walking. So he lived in rural India, and every Tuesday there would be the village market when people would come to sell things. And I remember he carried me in his arms, and I remember my perspective from being in his arms, watching this busy street full of people. And we were going to go and get me a doll. He was going to get me my first doll. So, and we did. And I have that memory. And very recently, Shrikant and we were together, and Shrikant asked my son, Agastya, what's your earliest memory of the place we all met at, right? And Agastya says, my earliest memory is that the carpet was very beige. And we said, but of course he was a baby and he was crawling in that apartment all of the time. And he could remember the beige carpet. So that's that. I'm going to share my screen. And let's see here. So Louis Sullivan talks about childhood, and childhood being that of a free soul, not constrained by adult ideas. So, see, so what is a child? And the child in the family, so he kind of tells us about how he was part of a family. His development of consciousness, how did he start thinking about what's around him, and how did he start relating to the environment, to himself, to people around him? And then, of course, everyone's talked about the continuous breaking in from the outside and breaking out from the outside, which shaped his destiny. So I'm not going to repeat that again. Then he talks about laws and powers, the order of work, the song and action, the song of work and action. He also talks about his school experience, which was just a negative part in his exciting childhood. And then he talks about his own adventures. So I'm going to use that same framework to kind of talk about, what is the child in the family? And we've talked briefly about this in kindergarten chats about, how every child has that potential, the seed, to be the best, to achieve the highest possible things that humans can achieve. And as adults, we don't even know what those possibilities are, but to give the child the freedom to nurture the child's spirit is what adults should be doing. He talks about the adults in his life, his mother, and one of the first things that a child experiences is the mother's voice. And if you look at an infant, when the mother's singing, they're just watching the mother sing. They're just watching her lips or her face, even as old as a 1-year-old child, they're still just looking at the movement and they're soaking it all in. The language is all being absorbed in the mind. So he talks about how his mother often dandled him on her foot, holding his puny outstretched hands in hers, and in great glee and high spirits sang to him. She talked about other heroes of the nursery. She talked about other heroes of the nursery. He felt these tales to be true, especially when the high points and low points of knee action were reached in rushing climax. So it's the physical rocking of the baby while talking. And how often do we do that as, a very natural response to babies? So talking about heroes and talking about great achievements is so important, because that's what lets the child believe that they are capable too. He talks about his father, and he says, his father was very patient. He explained things to his son. He spent most of the time with his father. The bond of the union was the love of the great out of doors. So, too young to philosophize and search his soul to discover sin, he took all things for granted. It seemed natural to him that there should be flowers, grass, trees, cows, oxen, sunshine, rain, the great open sky, the solid earth underfoot, men, women, children, the great ocean and its rock-bound shore. All these things he took at their face value. They all belong to him. So his love for being outdoors was from his father. The other thing he talks about is how children often think, at least till the age of 11 to 13, they believe that their parents can never be wrong. They believe, and then around that time, they start seeing faults in the parents, and then the parent can never be right. So the child, he's talking about the time after he sees his father on the sea, and the child, dumbfounded, ran to meet his father in wild excitement. His father, very patient in such matters, explained it all as best as he could, and the child listened eagerly with some understanding. What was said must be true, because his father, who knew everything, had said so. So, children believe in adults, and it's so important that adults take that seriously, that they don't hurt their children by saying things that are flippant. And I feel sometimes that does happen. So then he talks about his grandmama, who was just, the most loving grandmother. All grandmothers are like that. And he talks about his grandpa. I really like the part about his grandpa. Sherri talked about the letter that the grandparents received from the teacher. And it was from the teacher and set forth with deep regret and concern that his grandson was a dull boy, that he was inattentive, would not study his lessons, was always at the foot of his class, but he was a nice boy. And the grandpa dropped the letter on the floor, burst into volcanic laughter, roaring until the lid of the heater rattled, rocking forward and backward on his chair, clapping himself on the knee in a series of subsiding outbursts, ending in a long-drawn, spasmodic chuckle, expressive of his cynical sense of humor, his infinite contempt for those who had eyes and yet saw not. To call his sharp-eyed grandson a dullard? Why, he said, one might as well call Sirius a flapjack, and other joking words to that effect, for he was fond of teasing his grandson, whom he had so long watched out of the corner of his eyes. And I so wish that parents would do this for their children and not just believe, things that teachers write about their students, because teachers only see such a small part of the child's life. And when we go to see his school, we'll realize why he was such a dull boy at school, or that the teacher perceived him to be a dull boy. But the grandfather did not see that. You see a different side of the child at home. He also talks about his extended family, his Uncle Julius, and how his Uncle Julius is a strong man and how he can do all the work. So a child is part of the family, and all members of the family make a big difference. That the child is developing culture, the child is developing character through the environment that the child is in. So one of the things that Maria Montessori talks about is having a rich environment for the child so that they can soak in all these experiences and build their imagination. So then, as the child grows, they start developing consciousness of what's around them and discovering, everyone's talked about the moon and the snowflakes. So I'm not going to go there because that's exactly what it is. The child is making observations about natural phenomena around him, and he is making his own discoveries. He's developing as a young child, learning to walk, learning to talk, learning to socialize. He's trying to see who he is and how does he fit in with everybody else in his family and around. He also talks about when he is at Folly Cove with his grandparents, and he's aware suddenly that when he was naked, so the farm man returned to his work, the children quickly gathered, the women folk rapidly stripped the chilly child, rubbed him down with his harsh towels, and stood him naked with the back to the glow in the huge fireplace. The children, all older than him, looked on curiously, pointed and giggled. For the first time, he was aware of vague sensitivities. He felt uncomfortably that there was something in the air besides atmosphere. a new world was gestating in the depths. So he's now becoming aware of himself and other people around him, and how, those experiences affect him. And then we've talked about the drama of work and action. When my son, Agastya, was little, he loved trains. He absolutely loved trains. And so we would spend hours at the train station at the transfer depot. And we would sit there and watch trains just being shunted back and forth, back and forth. And I had no idea what impression that was going to make on him. He was probably 2 years old at that time, 2 to 3 years old. And we would spend the afternoons watching the trains. When he was 13, he traced all the train tracks in our area and figured out all the train, the starting points and the ending points of train tracks across the country on a map. And I was just blown away, because that was the impression that was imprinted in his mind when he was a very young child. And it manifested much later, when he was just about to get into middle school. So those early impressions of work and action make a big difference. Often we see, sometimes we had once a group of people cutting a large tree in our school's backyard, and all the children just stopped working. They were all glued to the window pane, and they were watching these men and the crane and the machines do their job. And when the men were all done, the children were satisfied, and then they got back to their work. But children just take in all that information, and they're watching it with great detail. So when they are paying attention to all these details, they are forming in their brains their own ideas of how life works. They are making those connections, as Rob said, that, with these lessons, that with these experiences that they're learning, they are philosophizing their ideas, and they cannot probably express them in words, but they can do them in actions. They can live them in experiences. So being out in nature, and by watching all the details, he was able to make associations. He was able to take in all the details and then apply them later in his life. And we'll see that later in the book when he talks about his buildings. I just want to read this part. So he talks about his school. Next day at school, he pitched in, and the next day and the next, shutting out olives. So this is after the grandparents have received the letter, he decides that he's going to pay attention at school. Oh, it was so easy to head this class, so easy for one who knew what the upper grades knew, or thought they knew for the moment, or perhaps a day. They knew not that it was all save a bare remnant, fatted to fade away forever. Tired of heading the class, which was so easy, he occasionally, and indeed with increasing frequency, fell to zero, because of a lapse, because perhaps of a twitching squirrel in a tree nearby, or a window, or a beautiful white cloud curiously changing shape as it slowly drifted through the beautiful blue sky. What did it all amount to? What signified it to be the head of a row or dulwich? And so, if you see in schools today, children are not given the opportunity to imagine. I mean, this was even back then in Louis Sullivan's time. So if they're not looking and making connections, then how are they going to be able to work and do things by themselves? The whole idea, I just wonder if Louis Sullivan were in school today, what would the teachers label him as? Would it be ADHD? Would it be processing speed is too slow? I don't know. These children who are highly imaginative, they are going to be distracted or attracted by things around them. And their mind is going at 1,000 ideas a minute, and the teachers are just too slow for that. So from the work that he is seeing in his daily life, he is making observations about an order of procedure, order of work. The men come, they do this thing, then they do the next thing, then the horse comes, and so on and so forth. So he talks about his uncle Julius, and he talks about men doing the work on the ice blocks. He says, and the men at work cutting ice. How exciting it was to watch men at work. They used large hand saws to cut ice into square blocks, and there was one saw drawn by a horse. Then the men with poles shoved and dragged the ice blocks through clear water to the bottom of the runway, and then it was hauled up by the runway by a horse that walked away with a rope, and that ran through a pulley and then back to the ice cake. The ice seemed very thick and clear. I mean, so all along, he's just making observations of procedure and order. And that's another thing that we see in a Montessori classroom, the order of things, that children like order. And when we say, oh, let the child just, be free without any limits, that does not work for the child. So yes, there has to be a balance of being out and about, and then the order of things so that they can do things independently. He talks about the song of work. He says initially he is fighting his grandparents about going to school, and then he announces, I am ready to go to school. So when the child is ready to go to school, the grandparents take him to school. But let me just talk to you about things that he saw in nature. The child stood transfixed, appalled. The strange faraway storm as of distant thundering was arising within his wonder self. He had seen many trees, yes, but this tree was his own tree. So when children are doing big work, so Maria Montessori talks about the need for children to do big work, carrying heavy things. When, a child could be just 3 years old, but they love carrying the gallon of milk from, the grocery bag to the refrigerator. They love carrying big things and doing big work. They love to sweep and mop. Any parent with a 2-year-old knows the fascination for a vacuum cleaner or a broom in the house that a 2-year-old will have. So doing big work and making those connections. Now, this is the experience that Louis Sullivan had. And then he goes to a school and look at the change in the environment. This is the environment he loves. This is the environment all children love to be in. And then they go to a school where he says, the children sat at rows of desks, a row per grade, at right angles to the rear wall. In front of them, an open space for recitation by class, blackboard on the wall, and so forth. There were 5 grades in a single room. Teacher sat at her desk, ruler in hand, to rap with or admonish. All the children studied their lessons aloud or mumbled. Everything was easy, so for him, everything just was easy. There was, however, a certain order of procedure. But he did not fit in. He says, somehow he did not fit into the curriculum or the procedure. He was of a pronounced independent nature. He quickly became listless to his own lessons. He seemed to be nothing but a pair of eyes and ears not intended for books, but for the world little and big about him. In this immediate sense, he was almost devoid of self-consciousness. But one day he awakened to the fact that unawares he had become interested not in the books, but in procedure, said procedure consisting in oral examinations and recitations of the grades above his own, in accordance with the arrangement of the schoolroom stood directly in front of him. And so he goes on to talk about how he then adapted himself to be successful at school, but school was not his best thing. We talked about what does it amount to? So I'll tell you, I was tutoring a student, middle school child, who had a problem of Jenny has 3 bags of sugar, bag A, bag B, bag C. She takes 22% of the sugar from bag A and 26% of sugar from bag B and puts it in bag C. The mass of bag C is now 50% and the weight is 7.2 kilos. So how much sugar did she have in bag B to begin with? And so it was my husband, my son, another PhD student, and we, 4 of us, plus the child's dad, solving the problem. And my son said, why can't Jenny just go about measuring sugar like normal people do? And so the thing is, we still have those ridiculous problems in our math textbooks. Why? I don't know. Then he talks about school. He says, what a dreary prison the primary school of that day must have been. His recollection of the stay there is but a gray blank, not one bright spot to recall, not one stimulus to his imagination, not one happiness. I mean, that is the thing. Children can imagine at a much higher level than they can read or write. And the focus is so much on reading and writing that teachers don't let the children take their ideas and make them concrete. And so when imagination is not tapped, those children get bored. So these, not one bright spot to recall, not one stimulus to his imagination, not one happiness. These he found only at home. He learned his letters, followed the routine, and that is all. So that's what school, and can I tell you, it is so true even today for so many children around the world. So we are now, I mean, it just is very, very sad state of affairs that children still are bored to death at school. So then he talks about his adventures. He says, there was a child went forth every day. And that quote is from Walt Whitman's poem. And he, you can see when children are engaged in work, they absolutely are joyful, and they are observing every little detail, whether it's an animal, whether they're shoveling snow, any of that. So I want to talk about Maria Montessori's idea about the absorbent mind. And what she discovered when she worked with children was that between the ages of 0 to 6, children have this amazing capacity to soak in information. It's like a sponge. And she calls that mind, the absorbent mind. You can see the child is observing, making associations, making connections, memorizing details, and it's all becoming a part of them. They've taken everything that's around their environment, and therefore Montessori environments are rich in living life. They're rich in geography, they're rich in history, science, math. They're rich in tools and materials that are beautiful and engaging to handle. Children are constantly learning from the people around them. So the mother is talking to them, the grandparents are talking to them, they're taking in all that language, and perhaps they are not able to read and write that in complete sentences. But in Montessori, even before the child can write with a pencil, there's a tool called the Movable Alphabet, because the child can already construct those stories in their head. So at 4 years old, a child can write a story because they can move the alphabet. It's like a printer's set of letters, and they can physically pick the letters and construct the words and then create their own stories. So imagination comes much before reading and writing skills. Then Louis Sullivan talks about his ability to look at things. He says he possessed a picture memory. So he thought like everything was an image. And in kindergarten chats, he also talks about how sometimes thoughts just come as images and words are too slow for him to process. So children are taking in those images. Their mind is like a camera, and we may look at a plant and have a certain image of the plant, but a child will process that differently. When they water the plant, they're looking at, taking care of the plant. They are taking in information, and it's just part of their life. It's just who they are. As he says, they all belong to me. And that's how children view it. And that's how Maria Montessori saw that it is so effortless for children to take that information in if it is provided in the right manner. And that becomes the personality of the child. So it's important at that age to give them a variety of experiences so they can develop their interests. And then when the child learns through these free choices and they engage in activities where there's a hand to brain connection and it's concrete, it's not abstract, then they really learn their lessons. They are able to retain them for life. It's not just for one day or for the exam itself. So it's important for children to be out and about, and learning should happen outside the classroom walls. So Maria Montessori talks about spontaneous activity that is generated by the child. She talks about follow the child, and Louis Sullivan talks about form follows function. The idea is that if the function is to educate the child, then look at the form of the child, look at the nature of child to see what they need in terms of their education and obey their natural psychic development. So here I want to share the poem by Walt Whitman. So let me just give me 1 second. So there was a child went forth every day, Walt Whitman. There was a child went forth every day, and the first object he looked upon and received with wonder or pity, or love or dread, the object he became. And that object became part of him for the day or a certain part of the day, or for many years, or stretching cycles of years. The early lilacs became part of this child, and grass, and the white and red morning glories, and the white and red clover, and the song of the phoebe bird, and the March-born lambs, and the sow's pink faint litter, and the mare's foal, and the cow's calf, and the noisy brood of the barnyard, or by the mire of the pond side, the fish suspending themselves so curiously below there, and the beautiful curious liquid, and the water plants with their graceful flat heads, all became part of him. And the field sprouts of April and May became part of him. Winter grain sprouts and those of light yellow corn and of esculent roots of the garden, and the apple trees covered with blossoms and the fruit afterward, and woodberries, and the commonest weeds by the road, and the old drunkard staggering home from the outhouse of the tavern whence he had lately risen, and the schoolmistress that passed on her way to school, and the friendly boys that passed, the quarrelsome boys, and the tidy and fresh-cheeked girls, and the barefoot Negro boy and girl, and the changes of the city and the country wherever he went. His own parents, he that had propelled the father stuff at night and fathered him, and she that had conceived him in her womb and birthed him, they gave this child more of themselves than that. They gave him afterward. Every day, they and of them became part of him. The mother at home, quietly placing the dishes on the supper table. The mother with mild words, clean her cap and gown, a wholesome odor falling off her person and clothes as she walks by. The father, strong, self-sufficient, manly, mean, angered, unjust. The blow, the quick, loud word, the tight bargain, the crafty lure, the family usages, the language, the company, the furniture, the yearning, and the swelling heart, affection that will not be gainsaid, the sense of what is real, the thought if after all it should prove unreal, the doubts of daytime and doubts of nighttime, the curious whether and how, whether that which appear so is so, or is it all flashes and specks? Men and women crowding fast in the streets. If they are not flashes and specks, what are they? The streets themselves and the facades of the houses, the goods in the windows, vehicles, teams, the tiered dwarfs, the huge crossing of the ferries, the village on the highlands seen from afar at the sunset, the river between, shadows, aureola and mist, light falling on roofs and gables of white or brown 3 miles off, the schooner nearby sleepily dropping down the tide, the little boat slack-towed astern, the hurrying, tumbling waves and quick broken crests and slapping, the strata of colored clouds, the long bar of maroon tint away, solitary by itself, the spread of purity it lies motionless in, the horizon's edge, the flying sea crow, the fragrance of salt marsh and shore mud. These became part of the child who went forth every day, and who now goes and will always go forth every day. And these become part of him or her that peruses them now. That's by Walt Whitman.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Rupali. Thank you. This is just amazing, amazing presentations. So folks, now it's time to talk about, anybody wants to talk about what they got from this meetup or ask a question, go ahead and type exclamation mark. Sherri.
You didn't tell us your earliest memory.
That's a big story. I'll think of it.
Okay.
But my memory is actually very, very poor. It's unusually poor that my especially my mom and my sister just laugh at me because they will keep telling me about, remember when we were this and doing that. Is it what? So anyway, I'll get back to you. Next up is going to be Joe, followed by Evanique. Joe. Oh, just a second. Can you go ahead? Sorry about that. Go ahead, Joe.
Okay, thank you. I mean, they were fantastic presentations all around. I mean, they always are, but this was really, really, I mean, it was kind of confirmation for me too as well, since like a lot of the things, the quotes that you had read, were some of the ones that I highlighted as well. The one that was actually really interesting to me was about the one building the wall, where he was asking why the wall was there, and actually what was it made out of? What was the point of doing this? And I almost got this feeling of this is inquisitiveness that is kind of leading to the form follows function kind of thinking that comes along. So the other thing was the children as philosophers is really fascinating to me, because they are philosophers, they just don't have the context. And it really, the ability to listen to children and actually discern what they're saying, you get incredible wisdom from the child. And I felt like the school setting, the way it was described, just killed that. Like it was just one way all the way. But I really think that one question I had for Rupali that had come up was the idea that children really they focus on imagination early on versus reading and writing. And does the Montessori method actually focus on imagination at first, and then integrates the reading and writing along with that? Is that a distinction between the way Sullivan was being taught? I mean, just a couple other comments really quickly is that it also the idea of always, this resonated with me in one way. I always was wondering what the older kids were doing, and I was always interested in what the older kids. I mean, I have 3 older siblings, so I was always interested more in where I was supposed to be heading to, as opposed to what I was doing right now. And sometimes that would be to my own detriment, but sometimes it would be also to my own advantage. I'd have a much bigger grasp on some advanced things, but sometimes I was skipping steps. So this whole thing these two chapters really opened my mind on a number of levels. But I would like to know, like, essentially, quickly, if you could comment on that imagination, forming the imagination versus the reading and writing skills, and the relationship between that and maybe the way traditional school and the way Louis Sullivan was being taught, and maybe why it didn't necessarily resonate with him initially versus, a Montessori approach, which probably would have been, at least harnessing his incredible skills to capture the essence of what was going on around him. I mean, and he did it so beautifully. I'm looking forward to reading half of this book about the child aspect of it now. Normally you would never say that, but now I am. Anyway.
Wonderful. Thank you, Joe. Great comments. Rupali.
So I would say, Joe, in Montessori, so here's how Maria Montessori saw the child. She saw that children are, the parents are talking to the child, everybody around the child is talking to them. And the child at the age of, 1 and 2, they're not able to form any sentences and communicate in full sentences. But they are taking all that information in and they are making those connections. And at the age of 2, they can start talking in complete sentences. I'll tell you, my niece's daughter, actually, she is one and a little, almost 2 years old. And it took her a long time to kind of start making sounds and talk, but she is very, very observant. And we got her a rocking horse, and there's a Hindi song that her grandparents were always singing to her about a rocking horse. And the moment she saw the horse, she said, "Ghoda, lakdi ka ghoda," and that was it. Nobody had to teach her that. And that was because she had made that connection. She had made that image in her brain. And when she actually saw the concrete horse, she made the connection. So children are not stupid. And they may not be able to read or write because their muscles are not developed. They haven't figured out the phonetic elements of a language, but they can imagine. And so what Maria Montessori does, and this happens in all languages that Montessori education is imparted, they have a set of movable letters. And the child can actually pick the letters and form a story. And so it's very common to see in a Montessori school, a 4-year-old forming an entire story with the letters. And then they draw a picture, or they will place objects to kind of show their story. We had a student who came to our school at 5 years of age, and the school that he was going to, the teachers had told him and his parents that he was unteachable. I mean, these are literally the words that they used. And he came to our school, and within a matter of weeks, he was, constructing his own stories with the movable alphabet, and then started to read and write because that motivated him intrinsically to learn to read and write. So children are forming the constructs of language much before they can actually start to physically read and write the words. So that's one thing. And then you talked about older children. So in Montessori, it's a mixed age group, and there's a 3-year age group that's typically together. And the reason is precisely what you said. You're interested in what your older siblings were doing, and you would learn faster with your siblings than, a teacher standing in the head of the class and kind of dictating the lesson. It's again the absorbent mind. The child is watching from the periphery what the older kids are doing, and then they are motivated to do that. And so when it's their turn, they have already, it's like meeting an old friend, because they've already seen the material, they've already seen the lesson, they've already seen the older children doing it. And often the older child will give a lesson to the younger child. So it works really well to have older and younger children together.
Thank you. I'm going to add one thing. I just want to make one point, and then Sherri. You can think of this in terms of form and function. Most schools are trying to impart the form. They're saying, this is how you read things. This is what the knowledge is. This is what the mechanics of mathematics is. Learn this. This is the form. Okay. But what you really, and Montessori is very good at this, or what Louis Sullivan is doing, that he's focused on the function of actually seeing what is going on and how things are. And that comes first. The appreciation of that comes first. And then the teacher and the material has to be patient for the function to actually get the form. If most of the schooling is to actually say, form is primary, I will hit the function with the form and in the process destroy it, rather than let it naturally grow into, naturally let the function grow into a form. Sherri.
Yeah, I was just gonna tie in a little bit into this and talk a little bit about what happens in a Montessori classroom when a child is an emerging reader, learning how to read. The Montessori materials have all these little tiny steps that build one on top of the other. It's never presented to the child as, we're reading. This topic, this verb of reading is never presented that way to kids. And so they're building up and building up to it. And there happens this magical experience of when a child will suddenly be reading, but not yet made the connection that they're reading. And then that connection happens like a flash. And it's usually highly emotional. And that happened with Walter. He was with his grandma and we're all sitting in the room and she was reading a book to him and she flips a page and he started reading. And so she looked up at me and I just went, shh, don't say anything. And so she just started flipping pages, page after page after page. He finished the book and then burst out in tears about the joy of what he had just accomplished. That is far better of making somebody a lifelong reader and a lifelong learner than smacking somebody over a head and constantly telling them, you must learn how to read. You know, it's one just is far, far more effective.
And
Go ahead.
I'll just add to this. And the child says this to themselves. He had discovered this thing. He had mastered it. And that's the feeling, you see it often in the Montessori classroom, that aha moment when the child gets there. I remember Shrikant's niece, we had gone to IHOP for breakfast and they gave her a little cup. And she was just 3 years old and she started reading on the cup and there was the word endangered. And she read that and I was just blown away. It's like, wow.
Cool. Yes, Joe.
Just really quickly, I mean, and in that discovery process is the idea of ownership as well. That you have your owner, and Louis Sullivan talks about that in this chapter, is the idea of I'm owner, but you're part of it. You're actually reading it. You're coming to it on your own, so you feel actually part of it as opposed to it externally being just jammed down your throat. And it's really an interesting dynamic. And the older kid and younger kid dynamic is so important too, is because you have the idea of the purpose of where you're headed. And that's something that is, I felt like even when Louis Sullivan, he was spending time with his grandparents, I felt like he was gaining wisdom from that, that experience as well. And then you kind of see it coming out is, his how he articulates his experiences with his grandfather.
Yeah, excellent. I mean, that's another aspect of this, that you're basically regarding the seed, kind of the prime mover, as sacred. And what you're doing is that you're just giving it a good environment, whether kind of a loving grandparents, whether, older kids in the classroom, they're not coming at them in order to get them to do anything. They just are. And then the child kind of grows into that in their own speed, in their own way, in their own unique kind of shape of path. Thank you. Next up is Evanik and then Jyoti. Evanik. Evanik, you're on mute.
Yep, my mouse was acting up, sorry. It's so funny that we're talking about this and how children learn. And I think this is how people learn if you let them. And this goes back to my earliest memory. My earliest memory was like, I think I had to been like 3 or 4, and my mom used to buy these books. And they were like books on tape, but then you would go along with the story. And so one of the first ones I remember is Cinderella. And my mom just bought these for entertainment and, education. So I would just flip along with the book and, didn't even think about it. It was just like, you read the words. They had this little like tune when it was time to flip. And so I would just know when to flip. And one day I was in preschool and I told my teacher the whole story of Cinderella, word from word, from memory. And, like Sherri was saying, they fill in the gaps. My mom was like, that was the best day ever because they were about to put me in a special needs class because I didn't talk. And I wouldn't talk inside the classroom. And I wouldn't talk to anybody. And it was, so the day that I chose to tell the story was the day that Elwyn, which is like in Pennsylvania, it's the people that come in and decide that, whether or not you need a special type of education. And she said, and my mom said, you walked up to Miss James, which was my teacher. I remember her very well. I remember my teacher very well. And I walked up to her and I said, Miss James, I want to tell you the story about Cinderella. And she was like, Evanique, you talk. And I'm like, yeah. So I proceeded to tell her the whole story. And she said she went and got the principal and she was like, tell the story to the principal. And I did. And in my child's mind, I didn't understand why so many people wanted to hear this story. And it's just great because I think I was thinking of Louis Sullivan and form follows function. And the form that my mom chose was just kind of like educational entertainment. It wasn't, she just wanted me to be, she wanted it to be fun. And it was just something I was interested in. And I think we kill that in kids today. And I think of Louis Sullivan and I'm like, yeah, he would have been hauled off somewhere because he was observant. And I know for me, I was very observant. And that was why I didn't talk. I just liked seeing other kids doing what they're doing. Like when the other kids would take a nap, I would get up and watch soap operas with the adults. That's what I did. And my mom was like, yeah, that came from your grandmother because when she babysat you, you watch stories with her. And so, it's just, the point is that like what Louis Sullivan has tapped into and what we have lost as adults is our ability to just observe and absorb. And like you were saying in the beginning, Shrikant, his openness to life and life is force driving in, and also I wrote it down and now I can't find it. Life was beginning to break in and then also break out of Louis Sullivan. I'm summarizing, of course.
Mhm.
But I think traditional school, not Montessori, obviously, but like traditional schooling breaks that of us. And I thought, wow, just allowing yourself to observe and to learn without that judgment too. Like what really makes it apparent for me is like Louis Sullivan didn't really judge it. He just observed it and took it in and had his thoughts about it. And he didn't judge himself about those thoughts. He just kind of like observed it, had it. And I think a lot of times as adults, we learn to judge ourselves like, is this right? And just the final point, because I know Jyoti wants to go, is that when we talk about children as philosophers, yeah, they are, because they have no filter. They have no way of judging themselves. They're just saying what they think in their head. As adults, we're like, how is this going to come out? Like, am I going to make sense? Like, we have all these internal thoughts before we get the sentence out. And children don't have those internal thoughts. They just get the sentence out. And it may not make sense. It's up to you to figure it out and to ask the child questions until it makes sense to you so that you can answer the question. Thank you, Joe. And it's just, it just observed to me, like I was just hanging out with my best friend's 3-year-old, and we're just observing, and we were just playing, and playing in her pool, and she just absorbed life, and she just, and my friend Octavia and Vaughn, they were just saying, yeah, she just chooses her own way of doing things, like even potty training, like she did it when she was ready, and she just has her own observation of things, and she just learns, and she's a very bright young girl. And yeah, so I think like children are very much philosophers, and you have to decipher what they say, because it's still like, as 2 and 3-year-olds, they're still trying to form sentence and learn language, but they just come out, and you're like, and sometimes you just have to look at them and say, I don't know. I mean, I've looked at her, and she's asked me something, and I'm like, I don't know how that works. Like it was something like, where do bugs come from, or something, and I'm like, I don't know. I'm just going to leave it at that. I think we just have to be willing not to know. Number one, they're not, and not be, and be afraid to, and not be afraid to ask questions like children, and to just kind of say what we think and get feedback. And that's how we learn and grow. And I think that's the best way to do it. And I think you're right. Rupali's right. Traditional school kind of kills that in kids, and it goes into adults, and adults would do good to observe kids and just relearn that and become philosophers without all the baggage that we put on ourselves. So that was my observations.
Wonderful. Evanik, that was fantastic. That was fantastic. I have to tell you, especially I like the story about you telling the Cinderella story. I want to tell you a story in return. Like I have a friend, friends, and they had this kid who was about, I think, 2 or 3 at that time, and he wouldn't speak. Okay, and his parents were really, really worried. Okay, because he wouldn't speak. And they, I'd gone to visit them, and they live here in New York, and I've gone to visit them, and they said, oh, there is some problem with ADHD with this kid, and I'm going to put him on this medication and stuff like that. I said, okay, do one thing, just give me about 2-3 weeks. Okay, I'll come here like several times a week, and let me just talk to him. Okay. And the thing is that kid was extremely active. He liked to do things. Okay, he would be playing with his trains, he would be building all these things. So what I started doing was that I started playing with him, and I would talk about what we are doing. And I would talk about what we are planning to do. We could do this, or we could do that. And then he would initially just listen, and he would follow. Okay. And then slowly he started kind of using words, because he got the idea. It's not that he did not know the words. He thought, what's the point about just jabbering about stuff when really things is you're trying to do things? Okay, so he really wanted to do things, and he was very active, very imaginative, very energetic, full of energy in doing things. And then slowly, while I was talking to him, he figured out, oh, if you actually talk to people, you can actually play together, because you can actually tell you what people are doing. And then he started talking a little bit, and it was like one day I show up, and he takes me by the hand and names everything in his apartment. He would just point to this and say toaster. Then he takes me over there. And my favorite thing was it was a New York apartment, and he looked out and he said, building, another building, 1, 2, 3, 4, many buildings. So that's his description of the New York Times, the skyline. But then from then on, he just started talking, because he knew that nobody had showed him what talking was about, what this, talking was about. And they were going to put him directly into like, okay, you take these medications, so your energy level, it would destroy his ability to do things, the core of his strength, in trying to fix something, and it wouldn't fix it anyway. So it's, so thank you. Next up is Jyoti. Oh, sorry, Sherri.
Jyoti, just 1 second. I want to let you know that I had the same experience happen in grad school. I had already gone through architecture school, so I was used to doing things, drawing things, and speaking through drawings. And I decided to go back and get my master's degree in architectural history, having been married to somebody who knows how to use the words with some encouragement. So my first year, my very first semester as a grad student, I was supposed to be in just your regular classes, but I finagled my way into getting in the graduate second year, third year grad school, whatever it was, high level seminar class on arts and crafts architecture. And I had never been in a graduate level seminar before. These weren't the kind of classes I took in undergraduate. And I was puzzled about this whole back and forth discussion of ideas and where they were all coming from. None of it made a darn bit of sense to me. But you get your grade based on talking in class. That's what a seminar class is all about. So the class went on for, I guess, from August till December. And from August until mid-November, I sat there in the class reading all the material, not saying a word until they asked me. I had a presentation to give on Sullivan, actually, Sullivan and Frank Lloyd Wright, and stood up to give my presentation, and out flowed the whole semester of conversation. And I ended up getting an A in the class, but I waited all the conversation until I was ready to talk.
Wonderful.
Not
Thank
just-
you. Thank you. Next up is Jyoti.
I'm going to laugh about what you said, Sherri. This happens with me in 52 ideas. I listen to everyone. I'm absorbing everything. When my turn comes, I look at Shrikant and I say, maybe I'm sounding stupid. I'm just going to let it be. No, but I'm just kidding about it. But actually what I'm going to say is, what you just asked the question, what your memories in early childhood, they are done for you in shaping you up. So I'm looking at Louis Sullivan, and I'm looking at Jody from the age of 8 to 12. So I'm thinking my experiences were not that very different than Louis Sullivan. His family was very supportive of him. He always got like tacit permission from his father, grandfather, and you know how much it means to a child. He may not say, thank you, I appreciate, but he's getting the permission to move forward with it. So I, as a child, used to be a wanderer. I was very fond of nature, and I was surrounded by nature. And there were a lot of things every day to investigate. I could climb up on the red rocks, and I could pretend I'm touching the sky, and I could come down, and then I would go take my bike. I had that bike that my parents had given to me, and they used to regret that. This is what I'm trying to say. They used to say, she's a road inspector. When I would go home, they would say, did you measure all the roads? Were they intact? Everything was there. The wells, the windmill, the vegetables, those migrant workers, did you count them? Were they all there? So it was like making fun of me rather than saying, wow, she's got some aptitude at this age to go into nature and really, appreciate nature. So in his case, I'm looking at it, yeah, he was very assertive, he was very independent. In my case, I was very obedient, I was very respectful, because this is what the Indian children are supposed to be. I was reading, I was talking in 3 different languages because we had migrated from Iraq, from Baghdad. And I could speak Arabic, I could speak Punjabi, I could speak a little bit of French, and English, of course, I spoke very easily. So what I'm trying to say is, it's the environment that shapes you up. And he went on to he was creative to begin with. He had the potential that was reinforced and rewarded. And then he went on to become an architect because that was where his penchant laid. And I, on the other hand, I had a lot of pressure to make good grades because my siblings were making great grades. And my mother used to say, my father used to say, she likes different kind of things and she may not go that far. And you're telling a child who's 8 to 12 years old that you will not go that far because you're not making an A and B grade and you're just sliding through. Because my interest, I would draw a well with a bucket in it and people are pulling the water out because I had seen that happening. And that meant nothing to my family. The woman walking with a goat, that was nothing to the family. So the point I'm trying to make is that eventually I caught up with my dreams, with my earlier experiences. So my first master's degree was in, I was telling Rupali in a private message, it was in child development and family relationships. And when I came to the United States, my husband didn't think again. He was like my parents, that this degree of hers was of any use to her in America. He did not even know, that I could have really benefited from the degree. So I use the word he sent me to school because he did. It's just that I wanted to learn so much, I didn't mind it. But he was the one who said to me, you go and get another degree because you get a degree that will pay you in this country, not in India. You're not going to India anymore. So you do that. So I went into school psych program thinking it was more or less like child psychology, which it was. But here I come back to what Rupali had just written. My role, or the school psychologist's role, became like it was a diagnostician's role, that you had to go in the classrooms and pick special ed children needs. And I had to evaluate them and I had to come up with a diagnosis that was dictated by the state. You had to put the child in a disability that was dictated by the state. And if you, otherwise a child couldn't get special ed services. And talking about the chronic disorder and ODD children, I used to fight tooth and nails with the principals. I used to say, you're going to shove this child from your school to another principal will shove him from that school to another. You have to sit down and listen to this kid. He's got ideas. He's just a little frustrated with too much structure in your program. He has to go by the curriculum that you have come up with, not when he's allowed to think about it. And they used to come and talk to me about nothing about academics, about their passions, about their hobbies. I said, how on earth can I put this child in special ed? And I would go back to my childhood and I say, boy, this kid has got resources in himself, but nobody's trying to pull them out. So all that shapes you up eventually. And now I'm living in nature and I'm so much in peace, so much in peace. It really gives me daily satisfaction and minute to minute satisfaction that I can look out and I can admire the water, I can admire the sky. And believe it or not, I still look at that moon that you were talking about, Shrikant. How I do the same thing. And at this age, I do that. I said, we'll not see the clouds are covering, and now the clouds will go away, the moon will stay there. Now this moon will move here, and then I will get this kind of light. So that never goes away from me.
Wonderful.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Jyoti.
Thank you.
Thank you. Really appreciate that.
Thank you.
All right, folks. I think this is a fantastic start to this book. Now, unfortunately, I'm traveling next week, so it'll be 2 weeks from now, and we're going to be doing the next 2 chapters, chapter 3 and chapter 4, which is a very kind of logical unit. And as I said, in the beginning, it's this whole thing, it's just going to continue. Life was beginning to break in upon him from outside. Just the range of that is going to keep increasing, and more importantly, breaking out from the inside. That part is really going to grow, and it's going to grow in structure, in power, just through this entire story. So stay tuned, read with us, no matter how good you think a job that we are doing. I'm really delighted, to have all my friends talking about it, and the kind of appreciation that Joe, Evelyn, and Jyoti has. They are basically, they understand the core of this, and it's really wonderful to be talking to my friends and my extended friends over here. Is just wonderful. But at the same time, I want to say that what Louis Sullivan has to say is very deep, very deep. And so just like the child has to commune directly with nature, this is also part of nature. This is his life. You should commune directly with it, read directly and get your own kind of take on what he's saying and internalize it in your own way. And not just take in, but also speak out. So I would encourage you to write what you're getting from it. Writing is critical because that is the way in which you do this movement from inside out, to pay homage to say thank you to, and in the process actually build yourself, because you have to build these into you. That's what you're trying to do. So thank you very much, everybody. See you in 2 weeks.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you. Thank you.
Bye.
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 Bye.